All right, everybody, and welcome back. In this part, we're going to be taking a look into how to create this big explosion. And yeah, let's just go. Let's just do it. It's going to look like this. That's it. That's it. That's exactly it. And then you put it through the Pyro bake, and that's what you get. And if we quickly do a render, the whole setup has the same principles that we were just exploring in the overview. I essentially just want to give you guys an overview on how it was made, just so I can explain my process and my thinking behind it. But it's nothing special in terms of how exactly it was made. So that's it. In this case, I haven't played around with the shader that much. The shader that I used in those examples was a custom-made shader. This was before the Pyro bake was out, so this whole part was done using a different shader. So that's why it looks a bit different, because I haven't played around with the Pyro bake, although the Pyro bake volume is great and I love it. It simplifies things quite a lot. In our class, Explosions in Houdini, we show you guys how to create this from scratch and actually how to create something that I used in this example as well. Today, we will not go too much into this and how to modify it, but let me just try to tweak a few values. I essentially want to get a bit more of those darker spots, and that's the exact opposite. Just a second. Okay, so exact opposite. Come on. Yeah, it has, I mean, it has 30 million voxels, I guess. I think here, just go 3. It's going to clamp it a bit more. Yeah, I wonder why this is not changing it that much. There we go. So that does something. But yeah, like I said, I would have to play around with it just a bit more to get to the perfect setting. But this is great. I like the Pyro bake, and we will not focus too much on the rendering. Honestly, I just quickly wanted to show you guys how this was looking straight out of the render. Obviously, I used some compositing things when I was rendering it out, mostly just like additional glows and enhancing the emission a bit more. But this was it in general. You can see it's a bit blocky here. That is because this volume is actually the low resolution version. It's only 30 million. I think the final ones were at around 150 or 300 million voxels. That's why it's a bit blocky. But also when you add all the glows and when you add the motion blurs and such, it actually, some of that blockiness goes away. But yeah, if we go back and actually see how this was done, we have a bunch of emitters, and the emitters in this case look like this. They're like small like puffs of clouds that I used, and they have temperature, V, and density. So how this was created is quite simple. If we go back here, in most cases this is overly complicated. I haven't cleaned it up that much, and the way these emitters were made is overly complicated, I think, but that's just the way I use them. So you have a sphere, you create a cloud, I scatter points, and then with this guy I just create a velocity, jitter, and I move it. So essentially the way I'm moving it, it's going to change it. It's going to change the velocity direction. And then I replicate the points, so I get more of them. Point jitter. I don't even know what this is, but I'm pretty sure it's for velocity. Let me just check. Yeah, so adding randomness to the velocity. with the kernel noise and just adding it to the velocity. And I believe I borrowed some of this from Matthew's example files that you can get on his website, and I repurposed it a bit. So this, and then you create, turn it into VDB from particles, you create the temperature, velocity, and density, transform it. That's it. That's it. So that's how this was created, and this emitter, well, actually this one is a this one is just a bit different. In this case, I use that. Let me go back. So I use this shape, which comes from this. And the only difference is I add them together, and then add them like this. And everything here, and where this guy is, this is going to serve as our pivot, and the position of these points is going to serve as our spikes. So essentially, if I change this amplitude, it's going to become bigger, and the spikes are going to become bigger. And if I change this position, it's going to change the direction of our emitter. And that's how these spikes were created. And then the measure is not necessary here. Just ignore it for now. So when you have the spikes, you can just rasterize it, honestly. You can do velocities based on the normal, or just however way you want it to create. This is not really the point of this overview on how to create something like this. I believe we're gonna leave you guys with some HIP files that I'm gonna clean up, and then you can check out how this was actually created. And you can do it in other ways. You can just use a pop system. You can use whatever else. I showcase a bunch of different ways of doing this in the webinar on explosions. So that's how this and this is created. All the other emitters are just variations of the same thing. So it's the same thing, or different scales, or maybe it's inverted. So this is pushing the velocities down. All right. Then, as you can see, these are constantly on screen. So this is just a quick way of activating them and deactivating them. So switching to a null and back, and then you do it based on the minimum and the maximum value, basing it on the frame. And then you can specify. So this is essentially the life. It's going to be alive from frame 4 to frame 10. And this is our main emitter from the beginning. Then we, like I was showcasing you guys in the previous video, we separate the velocity from the density. We rename it, in this case, temperature, fuel. And then I added a bunch of controls to separate their intensity separately. I also have a collision that looks like this. This is the first kind of push that is happening. And I believe this is, yeah, so you see here, I'm using that influence parameters. Now keep in mind here, Matthew changed the namings. So right now it's called velocity. And when I was testing this out, it was still called influence vel. So he renamed it to influence velocity. I believe both still work, but the new workflow is with influence velocity, just in case you guys get confused. And everything else is the same. I wasn't even using this. And if we just add those two, just gonna color them red so I know which ones to plug back in. So if we just add those two together, go to the thing, we get this. So our influence vel is being used here. So you see velocity, I set it to frame step for the pressure as well. And we have combustion on like that. Simulation is using a bit higher values here for the turbulence and disturbance because it's actually quite bigger. You can see this is already at least 25 meters high, even more. So that will depend quite a lot on how your turbulences are going to be and how big your block size is going to be. Like you see, even block size, so 0.4 in this case is enough. And I would like to have, like I said, another disturbance, so I can add the block size to 0.2 as well. But this is what we get straight out of the box with just those two emitters like that. If we start adding the other emitters, so this emitter serves as another density temp. I think it serves as, yeah, this should be called, well, I'm sorry guys, because it's a bit dirty and not cleaned. But yeah, this should be vel, temperature, fuel, and density. So we have all of those guys happening. And the reason I do this is just so I fill out more. I just give it more density to work with, because if you don't have enough density, then when you pump more velocities, it's not going to have enough material, enough voxels to work with. So you can see here, I almost add it immediately, so it just explodes almost instantaneously without any buildup. And this is, in some cases, it's fine. This was not meant to look like a super realistic explosion. This was meant to be more of a, just like a showcase and completely over the top. So this isn't specifically made for realistic explosions, just to clarify that. So I add this with a lot of, I think I had fuel, temperature, and velocity. And in this part, I added influence and influence pressure, exactly. So this is where that pressure is coming from. And I can showcase, if I put the pressure to 1, this is going to be a lot smaller. Still okay. It depends on what you want. In my case, 50, because we are going to the extreme, guys. This is it. This is the pinnacle of explosions. We need to go to the extreme values like that. So this looks cool. And then I added the reverse velocity. I like doing this just because it makes explosions look a bit more interesting, not necessarily realistic. And this is just pushing everything downwards. And you can see I'm just using influence velocity, and that's it. That's the only thing I'm using. Disregard this. Oh, that might be a good thing when I was talking about, if I go back super quickly here, when I was saying that you need influence velocity and influence, you need the influence for influence temperature and influence pressure as well. Go back. I don't know if I mentioned that. I'm sorry if I did already, but just so you guys know, when you do pressure and temperatures, you also need to put influence temperature in front of it, and you need an influence field for all of them to work. In this case, I was not using this, so I can remove it. But if we plug that in, nope, you will see that it explodes. We create that big boom, and now it's gonna push everything down aggressively and then back up. And I just like to create that 1-2 punch where everything goes down and then aggressively goes back up. And I like doing stuff like that. And if we want, we can even increase this to 20, just because we are on the bleeding edge. Yes, that's exactly what I want. I want it to be so over the top, it's not even that it becomes almost like comical. But that will create some really cool shapes. As you can see, some really cool rolling shapes that I think it's just cool because of the sheer power that this explosion now has. And I just love it. But that's just me. Let me do a flipbook so we can see this in all its glory. It's magnificent. I don't like this part that much. Like it's just one big circle. I would prefer to separate it more into different shapes. Like this is just way too rounded for me. But like I said, this is more of a comical explosion, which is just like over the top, 100% over the top. Yeah. I love it. And don't be afraid to experiment with your own explosions like that. Just go like completely over the top. I think it switched to my CPU at that point because the GPU ran out of VRAM, and now if you go back, it's going to go back to the GPU. But just keep in mind, it's going to become a lot slower when it switches to the CPU. But it will switch eventually because, especially at this size, it has a lot of voxels. So we have the downwards one and then the reverse, and this will push everything up. And as you can think, it also has influence velocity and two of them. Yeah, I'm not sure. Probably a mistake. This is one. And then here, I think I just need the fuel. So I was pumping more fuel to this as well. I'm pretty sure that was probably a mistake to add. It's probably when I was copying all of these names. So yeah, I'm adding fuel and velocity in this case. And then I created another one that adds temperature and even more fuel. So you can see I'm just adding from the same. Oh, this is actually coming from this guy. Yeah, I wonder. You see it's calculating something. Yeah, I'm not sure why I added that, but you guys can see that that's how my brain sometimes works. But this should probably be under here, and I'm sorry for not cleaning this up sooner, but this should be probably here, and then I would merge it. Yeah, I would merge it with this emitter. But yeah, so you can see my mistakes as well. But that's how this explosion was done. And then if you want to see the whole scene, it looks something like this. So I have a bunch of assets. I create a camera. And then you just add your explosion to it. And that's the same scene and the same camera from that render. But yeah, that's it for that overview. For the over-the-top explosions. In the next video in this series, we're going to go through how to create this rocket launch. And it's very similar. It just has a lot of tweaking that you have to do to get to this phase where you get your volumes to behave like this, because you're essentially pumping in a lot of velocity and you need crazy fast expansions. So the thought process is a bit different. All right, guys, see you in the next video.